Hello, my name is Brian Friedland, and welcome to another episode of Inside the GSC. Today I am interviewing Lee University cross country and track and field runner Ryan Lovelace. Ryan is an all GSC athlete, made the 2023 GSC honor roll, and is the vice chair for the GSC Student Athlete Advisory Committee. He will talk about his journey to Lee, how he got into running, and more.
All right, so I'm happy to welcome in for today's Inside the GSC. I'm here with Ryan Lovelace of Lee. He is a cross-country runner, also a track and field athlete, as well as the vice chair of the GSC Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, of course, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity. I was pretty excited when you reached out, and then I'm just ready to go.
That's great. That's great to hear. Let's rock and roll then. Let's
There we
get
go.
going. So, just want to start off. Just how has your season been so far? I know you, at the time we're recording this, you've only had one race so far, I believe, up at BU. So, how has the season been? I'm sure you've had plenty of practices so far already. So, how has your indoor season been? You can even touch on cross country. How was that
Yeah.
for you?
So I guess we could just start at cross country. That was a pretty big step for me. So my freshman year I came in, I redshirted cross country. My sophomore year, I didn't make our 10 that ran at conference. So, and this cross country season, I was consistently running as our 1 and 2. I finished third at GSCs, third at South Regionals. So it was a pretty big base to build on for indoor. And indoor's weird because a lot of times you'll open in December right after cross country, and then you'll take a little break, and then you have Christmas break, and then you come right back in and you race when you're back on campus.
Right.
So we went up to Boston in December, early December after cross country. And for me, it was my first 3K indoors. So I didn't really have a lot of expectations, and the race turned out pretty well for me. I ran 8:06, which was provisional. I think I'm sitting 10th right now.
That's
I'll
awesome.
probably have to run a little bit faster to get into nationals, but the experience was great. And it was a really good and really encouraging building block for me just to open the season and then take a few days off and then have some motivation going into winter training by yourself.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's the first race of the season, so if you start
Yeah,
off on a high note, it can only go up from there, I feel like.
yeah, for sure.
So now we'll get into a little bit of your journey and just getting to where you're at now at Lee. So when you were growing up, were you always big into running, or was it just kind of something like you were fast and you were just kind of like, all right, I'll explore this avenue a little bit more?
Well, so the way the story goes is I grew up in a sports family. My dad played Division I football. My mom played Division I basketball. And, you can sit back and think none of those really correlate with cross country or distance running. So, growing up, I'm playing basketball, baseball, football, and I really caught on to baseball. And I liked baseball a lot, and I still do. But my sixth grade year, I remember getting really sick, and I missed baseball tryouts. And our middle school coach, Coach Conley, he's a great guy, love him. He coached me in football in middle school, but he wouldn't let me make up baseball tryouts.
Really?
So I was like, well, what do I do now? And I joined the track team, and I ran track in middle school. I had pretty good success, or enough success in sixth grade to decide to do it in seventh grade and sort of give up the baseball dream. And, I ran track and played football in middle school. And then by the time high school rolled around, I dropped football for cross country. And that was kind of just me going all in on this distance running thing.
Okay, that's awesome. And then, so I know you're from Cleveland, Tennessee. Obviously, Lee is there. So was there much, and I know every sport is different too. So was there much of a recruiting process for you, or was it kind of like you always knew you were going to Lee and that was just kind of how it was?
No, Lee wasn't really in the picture until it became the entire picture for me.
Interesting.
Being from Cleveland, I think I took for granted how strong the program was. And I ended up doing sort of a recruiting tour since I was lucky enough to get it the year after COVID had sort of passed. So I took 4 official visits. My first one was to Eastern Michigan. My second one was to Iowa. I went to University of Tennessee and then Lipscomb. And then obviously my Lee visit, that was the first one. But, it's one of those things where you think the grass is going to be greener. And then, just being around Lee, like Coach Morgan was great during the recruiting process. He's persistent. I remember he texted me the first day that he was allowed to like contact me. I remember him just texting me at all times. One time I was getting like a burger after a high school volleyball game and he texted me. But I ended up telling Coach Morgan no. I told him that I wasn't going to come to Lee. And then I just felt sort of like God closing other doors that I thought were legitimate options. And it kind of opened my eyes to the program here at Lee. And, throughout my experience, all these visits, as far as like people go, coaches, teammates, Lee was by far the best. And then facilities, we just got our brand new track when I was going through recruiting. And, it became an obvious choice once I realized.
That's awesome. That's an awesome story. And then now getting to Coach Morgan too, he's had a lot of success at Lee, especially recently, but it's been for a pretty good amount of time. Is there any like one big lesson you've been able to learn from him during this time, or do you have a favorite lesson, I should say?
I mean, I think with Coach Morgan, there's a lot of stuff that you can learn. But the biggest thing for me is just trust the process and enjoy it while you're doing it.
Right.
Program, well, with distance running in general, it's a progressive staircase. It's not like sports where you can come in as a freshman and compete against these seniors, fifth years.
Right.
It's a constant keep the ball rolling. And it was hard for me being in a spot where I was successful in high school to come in and be at the bottom of a new totem pole.
Right.
And he has really taught me just to trust the process. And what makes our program special is we have fun doing it. So we have a great group of guys. And, they say when you're working, doing something you enjoy, you never work a day in your life. And that's the same with running. When it gets hard and, we have high mileage blocks, hard training weeks, just having fun while doing it just makes it fly by.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the most important thing too, because a lot of people struggle with motivation when it comes to
Hmm.
running. So just if you look at it as fun and just another new challenge,
Yeah.
it's so much better than being like, oh, God, I have to go and run another 5K, 10K,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So that
And
makes a
then,
lot.
honestly, it's just like hanging out with the guys. I mean, especially on our just easy runs where we just go out, run 8, 9 miles. I mean, we're talking like we would sitting around the couch watching football. It's just a lot of fun sometimes.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I was a runner in high school too. I did cross country for 2 years and track 4 years. Very similar feeling where
Yeah.
it's just kind of like I'm hanging out with my friends and, it wasn't really a chore to me. So
Oh,
that's
yeah, it's a
awesome.
blast.
That's awesome. And then so diving back into the progression of the journey a little bit, I was wondering, so I know like when I first got into track, like I really want to be a sprinter. I feel like there's so many people that always want to be 100 meters. They see Usain Bolt running whatever world breaking record he's running, and they're like, I want to run the 100. But not every event is for everybody. So when you first got into track, did you always want to be a distance runner, or were you similar where you were like, I want to do the 100 meters, or did you even want to do
Yeah.
a field event? With your
Well,
baseball background.
you always see sort of the thing that like distance runners are just rejected sprinters. And I'm always like, nah, come on. And then I think back to sixth grade, I was like, I'm going to be a sprinter. I'm going to do the 100. And then I remember like the second day, I just got sent to the distance group. I mean, I was just kind of in middle school, I was this like 5'6", semi-athletic kid, which is just perfect for distance.
Right.
And then I excelled at that to a relative degree. And I can go down to the 400 a little bit, not at the college level. I mean, I'll get blown off the track, but yeah, I kind of wanted to be a 100-meter guy, 200 guy, but I just got sent to the distance group.
I feel like with distance though, it's so cool because you kind of learn what your true limits are because there's only a certain amount of limit that you can do with a short distance because it's over like that. It's done.
Yeah.
And then but with the 1600 or the mile, 2 mile steeplechase, whatever distance event you want to go over, like it's just like constantly pushing yourself and it's such a big mental game for you.
And the biggest thing is, I feel like with distance running, there's so many benchmarks and ways you can push yourself in training. I
Right.
mean, you look at like weekly mileage, like bumping up weekly mileage and looking back at where you were. It's like, in high school, I ran 40 to 50 miles a week.
Right,
And this
right.
summer, I'm up in the 90s. Like, and you can always keep pushing that. Like, I know in
Right,
a year or
right.
two, I'll probably be in the triple digits, which is intimidating, but it's a pretty cool personal feat to have.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've read any of David Goggins' books, but I know he does like those like Ultraman marathons where he's like running 100 miles and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting. But
Those ultra runner guys are crazy. I mean,
right.
even your marathoners, that's long.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so you touched on training a little bit. I know back when I was running in high school, we used to use this metric called VVO2 max. And I was wondering, do you guys use something similar in your training to kind of design your workouts, or are there any other metrics that Coach Morgan uses that have been really helpful during your time at Lee?
So a lot of what we use is called threshold. So it's related to sort of the threshold at which your blood lactates.
Right.
So you find a perfect pace, and usually that pace corresponds with a heart rate and a blood lactate level. So sometimes we'll prick our fingers after reps to see what our blood lactate is to test what that threshold pace is. And that pace, running that pace, is meant to increase your lactic threshold to where your muscles won't lactate until a certain level.
Interesting. Okay, that's interesting. And then following up to that, I know you touched on it a little bit where you're running, your how many miles during the off season. How does off season training work for you guys? Are you staying on campus and training with the team, or is it like you're going back home and you're just forced to do a bunch of road workouts, kind of that
Yeah.
type of deal?
Well, most people go home,
Okay.
but usually, again, I'm from Cleveland, which is really helpful, but we have guys that stay in Cleveland. So I know this summer we had 4 or 5 guys that spent the summer in Cleveland because they had jobs either here in Chattanooga. So we had big groups, and it was sort of just normal training. I mean, we get our plan. We don't just go off and do what we want,
Right, right, right.
but summer training and winter training are the two hardest blocks because you're by yourself and it's really hot and it's really cold. And then, just going back to making it fun, I've been lucky the last few years to have people here this summer and this winter. And it's really made what's supposed to be those hard training blocks a lot easier.
Right. I feel like too, just, we talked about like the brotherhood that is your team, and kind of you make friendships with other people that may be in other parts of Tennessee, and you can always meet up with them
Yeah.
and start working out. So it's not like you're completely on your own. It's like you got your brothers with you as well.
Yeah, and that's a big thing with running is there's such a camaraderie among distance runners, regardless of whether you know them or not.
Right.
So even when, let's say, everybody goes home for Christmas, I got guys that I race against in Chattanooga or in Ottawa or close by that I can run with. Or like even this summer, I'm going to be interning in Raleigh, North Carolina. And, I don't really know anybody at Raleigh, but I know a guy from high school that runs at NC State that's graduated, and he sent me some guys on the team that are staying there, and we're going to meet up and run. So, I mean, that camaraderie, it makes it to where you're rarely by yourself unless you just want to be.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's great to hear too. Never by yourself. But and then now we're going to go into your school life. So you're a political science major. I was wondering why did you want to major in that? And I know you're only a junior right now, so obviously you don't have to worry about applying for jobs just yet. But what's the end goal with that as it currently stands? I know
Yeah.
dreams can change and everything.
So the end goal is law school.
Okay.
And that end goal sort of determined what my undergraduate degree would be.
Right.
I mean, law school's not restrictive on what your undergrad degree is. Political science is by far the majority of law school applicants.
Right. Right.
And I enjoy political science. I enjoy the professors we have here at Lee. All of our political science professors are really good, and they offer sort of different world viewpoints because political science is one of those things where there's a lot of bias in it. And that's just inevitable when it comes to anything political. But we have a nice blend here. And I think it's going to prepare me well for law school and taking the LSAT soon.
All right. That's great to hear. And then I know like college sports are constantly changing. Like there's so many different issues that are coming up, especially with NIL, the transfer portal. I know it's not typically as big in Division Two, but still there's still some of it in there. So I was wondering how, as a political science major, how has that kind of made you think differently about some of these different challenges that are coming up in college athletics that maybe you didn't think of when you were just first entering
Yeah.
Lee?
So I kind of put on my nerd goggles from a political science standpoint. I think everyone sees the results and what happens, but I like to look at the why.
Right.
For example, the Pavia versus NCAA lawsuit. Obviously, most people know that it led to an injunction where JUCO years don't count for eligibility.
Right.
But I think it's cool that because the NCAA introduced NIL and pay to play, athletes can be classified, you can argue they're classified as employees. And because of that, Pavia filed an antitrust lawsuit saying that the NCAA, by restricting eligibility from JUCO NAIA, they're holding an unfair market share. So looking at sort of the innards of that is always really interesting to me and seeing where this is coming from. Because I feel like a lot of people look at it as, oh, the NCAA is just giving out eligibility.
Right.
Or no, they're just sort of dealing with NIL repercussions and dealing with antitrust lawsuits. I mean, that's the big thing when paying athletes, that NIL is it opens up to antitrust. I mean, the big ruling that everybody talks about, House versus NCAA, that's your roster limits, that's et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's an antitrust lawsuit. So it's just really interesting to sort of, for me to like look at the process, read the briefs, all that stuff.
Interesting. And then, so now diving into more of your student athlete advisory committee background, why'd you want to get involved with that? And then, what does your role as vice chair entail?
So I view myself as a pretty extroverted guy. And because of that, I've come to be friends with a lot of people outside of my sport. So getting into SAC at sort of our university level for me was about first representing my team. And then from there, getting a leadership role in our university SAC was about representing all the teams here.
Right.
And I felt like I was in a pretty good position to do that with relationships I've made. And then when it came to the GSC SAC, it was one of those things where we had our conferences. I made all these relationships with people, and I was like, I think I can be a good medium between sort of everybody and the Gulf South Conference. And the role has entailed a little bit. It's not a lot. Leah, our president, who I believe she was on episode 1 of
She was
this.
on episode one.
Yeah, she's excellent. I mean, she does a lot of the brunt work. She communicates, and my biggest job is just helping her out, doing stuff administratively that make her job easier. And then, there's also some cool stuff. I get to be on some cool committees that, you know, affect changes within our conference. Obviously, I play a part in sort of NCAA legislation grids that go out, which are a big deal for SAC. So it's a lot of responsibility here and there. But ultimately, I just want to sort of be representative and sort of use what I view as a gift of being extroverted to help other people.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and Aaliyah talked about that a lot, where it's like you guys really have a voice, and that's why I kind of tied these two together because it's always interesting seeing what your thoughts are when you're so involved with some of these issues constantly, and having to think about what would I do in this situation?
Yeah.
How can I do a better job of making sure our voices are heard when things are just constantly changing around us?
Yeah. And it's always interesting to see like what the voices sound like consolidated
Right.
because there are rulings and changes that would heavily affect track and cross country in a different way than they would affect basketball. So you have all these different angles at looking at something, and you have to sort of consolidate these into what's best overall for all of us.
Right, right, for sure, for sure. And then, so now this may be a loaded question, but are there any changes you would like to see in college sports that haven't been done already?
Okay, so I'll take an interesting approach to this. I'll focus on track and field.
Okay,
I would like to see them add a 3K outdoors.
okay,
So I'm going to dodge all the dangerous hot topic issues and just advocate for a 3K outdoors because we have it indoors. Your distance events indoors are mile, 3K, 5K.
Right.
And then your distance events outdoors are 1500, 5K, 10K. So, I mean, I feel like the 3K gets the short end of the stick. Us guys that like the 3K, I mean, we're stuck going up to the 5K now, which that's a little long, but it'll play. But, if the NCAA is listening, just add a 3K outdoors. We'll appreciate it.
I feel like 5K for just running around the same track, that could get a little tedious, I feel like.
Oh, yeah, especially indoors with 200-meter tracks.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
Yeah,
that's 25 laps. I can barely count that high.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And then so now we'll dive back into the athletics part a little bit more. So obviously you're an upperclassman now. Have you seen yourself as a mentor for some of those underclassmen that have come in? And what advice do you usually give people when they're, because obviously you've had an interesting journey just getting there. How do you try to mentor that next crop of runners at Lee?
Well, I think that coming into as a freshman and running college track and field and cross country is really hard
Right.
because you're going to change your training. You're going to be competing against people at a much higher level. And, it's a team full of guys that were very good in their respective area or their respective division. And, I came in, I competed well statewide in high school. I set all these records at my school, and I got redshirted because I couldn't even make our top 14 in cross country. And, it's a really humbling experience, and you have to swallow your pride and grow from it. And I think it's best as upperclassmen to sort of help those guys through it and understand that, we all went through this and, just give grace and help them and guide them when they need it. And most importantly, I'd say for our program is just leading by example
Right.
because there's a lot of accountability in this sport. I mean, we're trusted just to go out and run however many miles we're assigned and come back and say it's done, and that means it's done. So the best way to do it is just have a culture where we're just leading by example. And naturally, your underclassmen who are at a point where they're struggling and transitioning athletically, they're going to look at that, somebody who's been through it and somebody who's achieving success, and they'll look at that and they'll emulate it. At least that's the hope.
Yeah, that's a great mentality. And then just also too, like I feel like the common misconception too with mentors is it's like mentors have already learned everything there is. But at the end of the day, you're still trying to improve yourself. So is there anything you've learned from the underclassmen at Lee that you've been able to apply to your own running and be like, oh, I never thought of it like this. Let me like try like doing this in the next race or
Yeah.
something like that.
I mean, I would say like there's some particular stuff. Like we have this one freshman, he's from France, and he comes into races with like a killer mentality. Like the same mentality I would expect for a soldier like going to war. And I'm like, man, this is intense. But I look at it and I'm like, okay, maybe I could be more serious in some aspects because I'm the complete opposite. I'm pretty unserious. It kind of takes my mind off everything. And it makes me wonder if, if I were more serious, if I would be a little more sharp in the race. So, sort of finding a balance between that is something I've learned. And then, most importantly, sort of going back to how we have a culture of leadership by example, it's like if you're an upperclassman and you do something stupid and you see a younger guy emulate it, and you're like, oh, that's not good,
Right,
it
right.
leads you to sort of reflect on your actions because they're much more under a microscope. And you're going to have people that potentially could follow them, and that could potentially burn them and get them in trouble, all because they think it's okay because you do it.
Right, yeah, for sure, yeah, and you've touched on it. Leading by example is just it's so important because a lot of younger people like this was the same thing when I was doing cross country in high school. Like they look up to you. It doesn't matter if you're
Yeah.
the fastest runner or not, but you have the experience. You've done this before. So it's like, yeah, if you mess up and they're emulating it, then yeah, it's definitely key to be able to reflect on that and be like, hey, I need to start improving somewhere and just change my stuff up so that they're not emulating the same thing and potentially not having their best races that they possibly can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then do you have any advice for people who, because we've touched on it already, where distance running is a big mental hurdle. You get to that third lap of the mile or the last 1K of the 3K, and you're like, I just want to quit. So do you have
Yeah.
any advice for people who are kind of intimidated by running in the first place, and how you kind of get through that?
I'd say the biggest thing is avoid comparison
Right.
because running is such an objective sport that whatever your goal is, you can find somebody that's better than you at it and it'll bum you out. If your goal is to run a 5K, you can look and say, oh, there's people who can run a 10K as fast as my 5K twice. And that'll bum you out and sort of take your focus away from your goals. And that sort of goes back to having fun, honestly. I think that running is something that you can have fun with. Scientifically, the endorphins and the dopamine release from running is something that is inherently healthy and will make you happy. But you need to have fun with it. And the biggest thing is just avoid comparison
Right.
because there's the quote that comparison's the thief of all joy.
Yep.
And in one of, if not the most objective sports when it comes to time and distance, it's easy to have your joy taken away by comparison.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes because it is true. Like if you start comparing yourself to people, it's going to cause so many mental blocks because you're going to sit there and say, well, so and so ran a mile in 3:57. I can only do it in 4:25.
Yeah,
Like that kind of stuff, and it's just like that's not productive because then you're not able to improve yourself because you're constantly sitting there, well, I'm never good enough. But
exactly.
all you have to do is just go up against yourself and just constantly improve upon yourself, even if it's just by a couple seconds or milliseconds, whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if you're a 425 guy and you go out and run 420 and you're focused on, man, I just ran 5 seconds faster than I ever have, and not, oh, I'm 15 seconds slower than my teammate, it's going to bring you a lot more joy when you realize that this is my goal that I just achieved and sort of drown out the outside noise.
Right, exactly, exactly. And then now just getting into race day stuff, because I know every runner is different. Everybody's going to have like a different pregame ritual. I know like I used to listen to Crazy Train before races. That was what would always pump me up, being a big Patriots fan. Always pumped me up to have that on right before I was getting ready for a 5K. So do you have any special pregame rituals or pregame meal, pregame playlist? What do you do to get yourself kind of in that zone before a race?
So cross country is easier because it's so routine. We're going to wake up in a hotel Saturday morning. We're going to race.
Right.
Track gets different because, like for example, racing at Vanderbilt, we'll race at 2 o'clock, but we'll be at the track at like 8 a.m. But typically, if I have it my way, if it's cross country or if we're racing at home or we're hanging out at the hotel, I always like to shower like 2 hours before the race. There's something like that makes me feel confident knowing I'm clean on the start line, which it sounds really obscure to say it, but it also just helps me focus. And then some things that are non-negotiables, I'll always lay out my uniform, my sweats, my spikes, everything I'm going to wear in the floor the night before. And then when it comes to music, I'm really superstitious. So if I listen to a song and I end up running good, it gets added to sort of this repetition of songs I'll listen to before next race, and then vice versa. So if I have a song that I don't like, or sorry, that I listen to and I don't run good, I'll never listen to that song before a race again. So just an example is I remember sort of joking around with the guys on the bus on the way to Louisville, and I like played Rocky Top on my phone, like not like the band version, like the original Rocky Top. And I ran really good at Louisville. So I listened to Rocky Top before conference, before regionals, before nationals, and before Boston. So it hasn't failed me yet. So there's just 5 or 6 songs on repeat that sort of just make up a little pre-race playlist. And the problem with bad races is I got to find 5 or 6 more songs. But I guess everybody's a little superstitious. So, sort of hot showers, laying out my uniform, and then having that weird rotating revolving door playlist. That's where I let my superstition out.
Yeah, for sure. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I used to wear the same pair of Jordan socks for track races my junior year because I ran my fastest mile time in,
Yep.
and I'm like doing this every single race now. Same like
Yep.
warm up gear, everything. So everybody's got their superstitions.
Yeah, especially in running. And it's funny to see like all these different superstitions collide and just sort of these race day attitudes because, we have these guys on the team that it's like they don't want to be talked to before a race. Like, and then we have these guys that are just they want to joke around. So it's always fun to see everybody's like sort of calling card superstition.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And then now getting into the race itself, there's always that one part of the race where it's going to really test you mentally. Like I know when I was running the mile, there's always that third lap, the 300 mark of the 400, whatever it may be. So how do you stay locked in during a difficult race, and how do you kind of get through that mental hurdle that always inevitably comes in running?
So primarily our mindset that Coach Morgan sort of ingrains in us is compete, and not worry about time and compete, and then the time will come. So that's sort of my primary mindset. But when it gets really hard, especially in cross country, because when it gets hard in cross country, you still got a long way to go.
Right.
But I try and just focus on my goals, like what I want, sort of my why I'm doing it. And that's my goals. And then I also think of all the sacrifices people have made for me and all the sacrifices I have made to be here. So it just kind of reminds me this is why I'm doing it. And these are the steps I've taken to be in a spot to do this. And that sort of keeps me motivated. And then it's easier on the track because, the third lap of a mile is a lot quicker than 4K to 7K
Right,
in an
right, right,
8K.
right.
But that just sort of re-stokes the fire enough for me to get through sort of the tough parts of the race.
Okay, I like it. I like it. And then, so now we'll wrap this up with a couple fun questions for you. I always like to end these interviews with a couple fun ones. And so, first one will be if you could choose any event or running event in the Olympics or field for that matter, any track or field event, and you go up one on one against a current Olympian or past
Okay.
Olympian, whoever you want to choose, who would you choose and what event are you doing?
Okay, so who would I choose sort of influences what event. So Jakob Ingebrigtsen is the best distance runner in the world. By the time he retires, he's probably going to be the best ever,
Okay.
or if not the best, sort of top three. So I want to race him just to say I've raced him. I'm not saying I want to race the best because I want to beat the best. I mean, it would take him not finishing for me to beat him. Now, that being said, I'd want to take him in a 1500 because the race is shorter, which means I'll
Right.
be closer. So it'll be less embarrassment. I mean, if I'm racing him in a 5K, I got to worry about getting lapped and all these other things. But, if it's a 1500, we're going to be on the same lap. Like, I think if I have a good day, I can be within 15, 20 seconds. So, I mean, that'd be pretty cool to say, like, I raced one of the fastest men of all time and he only beat me by 15 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It'd be a once in a lifetime experience, I feel like.
Oh, for sure.
And then so we touched on music a little bit before. So you can choose Rocky Top if you want, but if you had to pick one song that best describes your life, what would you choose?
Well, my dad would probably say young, dumb, and broke, but I would disagree with that. Um, I would probably say Simple Man. I feel like it's just a pretty chill song that kind of, it tells you to sort of slow down and just focus on the day-to-day beauties of life. And that's something that I try to do and I try to sort of emulate.
That's awesome. That's a great song too. I love Leonard Skinner.
There we go.
So, and then we'll wrap it up with this question. So, you've obviously gotten your chance to run on a bunch of cross country courses by now. What has been your favorite cross country course to run on? And what is one that you would like to run on by the end of your collegiate career?
Okay, so if nationals conditions were good, if it didn't just monsoon all over the course, I would probably say Seattle, or not Seattle. That was a few years back. I would say Sacramento,
Sacramento, yeah.
but because of those conditions, probably Mississippi College's home course, Choctaw Trails. That's where GSC's was. The course was dry. It's not completely flat, so it's not the best time course. It's hilly, it's competitive, but it is fast. The surface is good. It's very spectator friendly as well, which is a big deal when you're running because the worst part of your cross country races are when you're sort of out there by yourself and there's nobody yelling. But overall, like I really liked Mississippi College. The result I had there was positive because, I mean, you've run cross country. You can run the best course, and if the result's terrible, you're going to be like, I hate that course. But overall, I'd say Mississippi College was pretty good. And then if I had to run one course, it would probably be Wisconsin's home course. It's kind of famous in the world of cross country in college. It's a really hard course. I probably would not enjoy it whatsoever, but it's just so historic and so many guys have run there. They host nationals every few years. They host Nutty Comb, which is the biggest cross country race in Division One. So it'd just be cool to say I've run the course.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, anyways, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to speak with me. This was great getting to know a little bit about your background, some new stuff about NIL and the Pavia case. That was antitrust stuff. So it was great to get to learn your journey, get to know your interests, and I'm sure there's so much more to uncover with running that we couldn't do justice with just this interview. But I appreciate you coming on and speaking with me.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on and speak. I enjoyed it.
I hope you all enjoyed our interview today. Remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever content can be found. Stay tuned for what we have in store next time on Inside the GSC.